Welcome to the Battle Buddy Podcast with Keith McKeever.
Welcome back to the Battle Buddy Podcast. I have Lori with me, and she is going to talk about some cybersecurity threats. Before we get her up here on stage, I just want to say, make sure you hit your like, subscribe, follow button, but most importantly, Battle Buddies, make sure you're sharing this and any other podcast episode that you listen to that you find valuable. Make sure you're sharing them with your Battle Buddies out there. That's where all the impact is, sharing it to the people who might need that message. So without further ado, we've got Lori Jackson. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Keith.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you on here because I wouldn't call myself a super tech nerd, but I'm kind of a tech nerd. So I kind of get the whole cybersecurity threats. It's the world that we live in these days. It's just something we didn't have to deal with 25, 30 years ago, at least to this point. So I appreciate you coming on here to kind of enlighten us a little bit about some of the things that are going on. And you have an interesting story. You did not serve, but you have, let me get the wording right, facility-related control systems for the Corps of Engineers and some other government work that you've done. So tell us a little bit about that and a little bit about your story.
Sure. Thanks, Keith. I'm so glad to be with you today and really excited to talk about cybersecurity. So my story is I went to school for computer engineering. So I've always kind of been in that geek spot, just like you. Started out supporting IT and, helping folks eons ago with their email and learning how to use the printer and those kinds of things. So I paid my dues and moved up through the ranks. But my entire career has been in the defense space. So I have been supporting Department of Defense my entire career. Like you mentioned, the Corps of Engineers, that's one of the clients that I have routinely engaged with throughout my time. And more recently, you mentioned the facility-related control systems. So we've been providing the cybersecurity design for some of those buildings that are being designed or renovated on different bases throughout the country, to protect the fire alarm from getting compromised, to protecting the HVAC so that the temperature doesn't get hiked up, from an adversary that's not even nearby. So you think about all of our systems nowadays are much more connected than they were, even 5 years ago. And so cybersecurity has become a key component in architecture and engineering design on our bases. Worked for the Corps of Engineers, like you mentioned, and also for the Navy. So we've been really excited doing that. But I spent, my entire career working in defense, and then more recently, prior to the pandemic, I started my own company, White Raven Security. And with White Raven, we do the facility control system design, but we've also been providing small businesses with support in all manner of cybersecurity, whether it's DoD contractors who have compliance needs, or if it's training, because your first line of defense is quite honestly your people. And if they don't know what to look for, then, you could be susceptible to an attack. And so we work with companies to make sure that their employees are being trained properly. We help them develop policies and procedures, setting up their actual security program. So a lot of the companies we work with, they're kind of new to the space and they don't want to go out of business because the more and more we see attacks on small businesses than any other sector of the economy, because small businesses aren't always equipped with the tools that they need to protect their environments. And so we've been supporting those companies and helping them feel more confident in the protections and pointing out, ways that maybe they can improve.
Makes sense. When I was Air Force Security Forces, so we were tasked with law enforcement, security, air-based defense, all that fun stuff. But of course, I got out 10 years ago. And when you say like Internet of Things and cybersecurity for buildings, the last unit I was at, we had a fairly new building. And I don't remember any kind of tech controls in that. And so it's kind of weird for me to think about like, okay, I get that because we were always concerned about physical security, the fence, the gate, the alarm systems, the camera, like all those different things. But it makes perfect sense, just in this new world that we're in these days where cyber attacks can happen from anywhere, that the DoD would be obviously a really prime target. And when I was in, we always talked about hard targets versus soft targets. You always want to be the hard target. Nobody wants to attack the hard target. They're always going to take the opportunity to attack the soft ones that are unprepared.
Right.
And so I think that's where a lot of the value in this conversation is
Mm-hmm.
those small business owners. There's a lot of veteran entrepreneurs out there
Yes.
who are probably really unprotected. I'm probably guilty of it myself. So,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not throwing stones here. Like I'm probably guilty of it too. Like we all have areas we could probably improve on that. So I think it's a
Right.
valuable conversation to have.
Yes. I agree.
So the training that you provide, can you elaborate a little bit more on what you do, and then we'll kind of dive into kind of what some of the threats and stuff that are happening out there.
Yeah, so we have a lunch and learn format for cybersecurity, because if you start putting people in really long, drawn out cybersecurity sessions, you know that they're just going to check out. And so our program kind of focuses on, lunch and learn, makes it short and brief, gives you, some takeaways so you can refer back. Oh, she told me about XYZ. And so you have like a cheat sheet you can go back to. And what we like to do is do these kind of frequently, like on a monthly basis, because the top of mind is important with cybersecurity, because the adversaries are not going to sleep. They're expecting us to let down our guard and be too tired to do X, Y, or Z, whatever those protections are. And so having that training at top of mind is always a good idea. The other thing that we like to do is tie it into your personal life. Who doesn't want to protect their children or protect their parents or their families, from cyber attacks? So if there's a way in your business that you can train your employees, that gives them that buy-in, that it also could be carried over to their families, they might be more eager to protect your company as well. And so we try to make it, somewhat personal, and give folks a chance to ask questions that are specific to their, particular situation. Because if somebody's going to protect themselves at home and they're trying to figure out how to do that the best way that they can, that's obviously going to carry over to their work life as well.
Absolutely. I love that you said it was, kind of bite-sized lunchtime, because, I kind of jokingly put my head down, but yeah, if I
Right.
sat there for like an hour, 2 hours of like a computer-based training, I'd just be like, okay, all right, time to go to
Oh,
sleep.
yeah.
All right, wake up, Keith.
Right.
But I
Yeah.
also think that it's cyber stuff, so everybody has a different level of ability. So
Hmm.
I like the fact that small lunchtime, you can digest just a little bit, and then maybe go back and take
Right.
action on that, and then come back for the next
Right.
session, because that's a tough topic.
Well, I've been in trainings before where they get into the technical weeds. And, for folks like you're talking about that may not have that same level of knowledge as maybe, one guy in the room, you're going to lose them. And so you have to bring it down to a level where everybody can be engaged in it. Otherwise, it's not very effective.
Absolutely. Like, wait, well, hold on, let's rope this back in a little bit. Let's
Right.
bring it back to reality for the
Right.
99% of people in there. So with the DoD compliance stuff, what CMMC is what I have in my notes. Can you explain what that
Hmm.
is, and what you do for the DoD compliance stuff?
Yeah, so the Department of Defense deals in a lot of data, as you're aware of. You do projects
Mountains of
that,
it.
there's all kinds of information that you create for the government or that they give you, and there's a certain classification of that data that's called controlled unclassified information. So it doesn't fall under what you're probably familiar with as the top secret or the TSSCI. It's not under that umbrella. It is something that is not for public release, but it should be controlled. And so for U.S. Department of Defense contracts that deal in the controlled and classified information, you have to show that your computer systems and processes and your people are all meeting a certain type of requirement. And that requirement is a NIST document. NIST is a National Institute of Standards and Technology. That's under the Department of Commerce, and they provide guidance documents for a whole manner of topics. But one of them is in cybersecurity. And so the main document that they provide is NIST 800-171. So any company that's dealing with controlled and classified information likely has a DFARS clause that tells them they need to meet NIST 800-171. Now, up until now, even that clause, just by signing that contract, you state that you're meeting NIST 800-171. But what a lot of companies have come to realize is it's a large effort to meet those requirements. And so you're more interested in signing that contract, getting that project started, and perhaps you haven't gone through all the steps to meet that particular guidance document from NIST. So where we have the CMMC come in, the CMMC is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, and that is the third-party assessment piece to NIST 800-171, where the government has said, okay, a lot of folks are just signing, they're doing it, and they're not doing it. So this is going to be our verification. So we're going to have these third-party companies come to you at your expense and make sure you are meeting all of those controls. And it's not something you can do over a weekend. It is a document that has 110 controls, and each of those controls has a certain number of assessment criteria that you would need to address in order to meet them. And it's not just your firewall. It's not just antivirus software, although those are things that are in the requirements, but it's also, personnel training. So do you do background checks before you allow certain individuals to access the government's controlled and classified information?
That'd be a good idea.
And it's a whole company approach to security. It's not necessarily just, the IT department has to flip a bunch of switches. And so that's where the CMMC has come in, is to make sure that companies are doing these things to help protect that data that the government wants to be protected. You were talking about hard targets. There's a section in the NIST 800-171 that's on physical protection. So you got to be able to lock your doors and, monitor for intruders. I mean, things that, are kind of common sense, but it was
the standard 10, 15 years ago for securing data. Now you got this other aspect to deal with.
Right, exactly. And so, it seems like it's going to be straightforward. And so a lot of companies have just been like, I'll do it when it's actually a rule that I have to implement. But some companies are already under that requirement, the NIST 800-171, even though CMMC hasn't come out yet as forcing you to show on paper you've done it and to prove it. There are an increase of assessments by DIBCAC, which is the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center. I always get that one. All these acronyms,
government acronyms. Oh my goodness, yeah.
But that piece is under DCMA, and they're starting to get requests to come in and do a government assessment of organizations that are supposed to be meeting these requirements even before CMMC comes out. So we've been helping companies to assess their systems, assess their policies, see if what they're doing for security is going to meet the government's requirements. And then at that point, if we find holes, then we can help, fill those holes.
And I would imagine pretty much any company that has a government contract is going to have some sort of documents, at least, and things that they have to secure. So it's everybody.
Oh yeah. Well, and just at the change in the last couple of years, there are other arms of the government that are looking at the same requirements because, our adversaries, if you look at what's going on in Europe and with Ukraine, part of that engagement is in cyberspace. So more of our threats are not necessarily on the ground. They're in the air that we can't see surrounding our systems. And so I would imagine that a lot of defense contractors, if not DHS in the future and others, are going to start requiring some level of cybersecurity hygiene and proof that you're doing those things to protect their data.
Yeah, it'd be good. So anybody who's paying attention to this really needs to, no matter what government contract you have, you might want to be the first. If nobody else is really doing it in your space, you might want to be one of the first. That way,
would be a differentiator.
Come hard on it, you can go back to the government and say, "Guess what? Hey, here's my papers. I'm good to go. I'm certified. I'm all ready." Yes. And I would imagine that the companies that you see that are doing this well, as you were kind of explaining that, I'm willing to bet that almost all of them probably have one person whose position is for compliance on this.
And it's not even their sole job.
Somebody's got that responsibility.
Right, exactly. And in most of the situations that I've encountered, it's somebody who's doing 4 different things.
Oh,
And
yeah,
so
entrepreneurs,
it's
right?
well, right, but it is cybersecurity and these requirements for NIST 800-171 are so in depth and complex that it really could be arguably a full-time job for one person. And then to have the support of management and human resources and other areas of the company, because like I said, it's not an IT solution. So it's not like, you put it to the IT department to figure it out. I mean, it is a whole company approach to security.
Absolutely. Look at it as an organization. If the leadership is buying into it, and the IT
Right.
department is doing what they need to do, and HR is hiring the right people, not people with crazy felonies or questionable pasts,
Right.
which
Right.
happens. I don't know how that happens. That just takes me back to my time in that. It was amazing how many moving companies. Maybe this is a good note for those that are still serving. The moving companies that contract and come on base to move your personal goods, almost like clockwork, every single one that would come through the base would have somebody in there with an outstanding warrant. And these
Oh.
are the people coming on base, trying to come on base, and move your personal
Mm,
belongings. So companies don't
yeah.
don't always check.
Yeah.
So if you're a business owner out there, you might want to start double checking that. That
Right. And
drives across your T's, right?
right. And it starts with your contracts. Those documents are long and arduous to go through, but it's worth, doing a search for those keywords, basic cyber hygiene or cybersecurity or NIST 800-171. Because if they're hidden down in there and you don't see them, it can have ramifications. There is a new memo that just came out from the Department of Defense in the past month that talks about how they're planning to enforce this in the interim. And there's a new DoJ initiative for whistleblowers to come forward in situations where companies are claiming they meet the requirements, but they're not. So the government is starting to take note because they're losing their data to our adversaries. I'll just give one real quick story that came from Katie Arrington, who was kind of a big pusher of the CMMC. She worked in the Department of Defense during the last administration, and so she was out trying to push these requirements and help and encouraging folks to start taking note and start improving their security. And she would always talk about the plane that China developed over the course of a very short amount of time that we had already spent 20 or so years developing. And the reason that they were able to do it so fast is because they came into our systems at a low level subcontractor, stole the plans. They didn't do any of the work, and their plane looks practically identical to ours. And so that's the kind of thing that we need to keep protected, is that information. It's like little puzzle pieces. So you think, well, I'm only designing the screw for this one particular weapon system. However, what our adversaries are able to do is they take that piece of information from you about the screw and then another piece of information from this other company, and they start to put together the puzzle to build the bigger picture. And that's what we need to protect, is not allowing them to do that, because it puts us at a disadvantage. If our adversaries can do just as well as we can, then there's no longer that advantage that we have.
Absolutely. That's really not much different than back in the day. A spy walks into an office and works there for 4 or 5 years, and all of a sudden, one day there's the plans for this new plane sitting right there on the table. There it goes.
Yeah. And they don't need to be physically present anymore.
Yeah. It also goes back to, I don't know if you ever, I like Johnny Cash, and he's got a song, I can't remember the name of it, but where he builds this car over like a 10-year period, and then he puts it together, and it's like 15 different cars. And it's this ugly thing, but kind of the same thing. Just take a little bit here, a little bit there,
Mm-hmm.
and the next thing you know, you kind of put that puzzle together.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. Because there's more than enough. I can't imagine how many contractors are involved in the design plans for, the F-22. You know what I mean? I'm sure there's hundreds of companies that are putting pieces together.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't always have to have all the pieces. You could have 85% of the pieces and figure
Right.
out the rest.
Exactly.
Yep. So these standards, when does the government have anything come out exactly when these are supposed to start and how that's playing out?
Well, like I mentioned, the NIST 800-171 is in practice right now. But the CMMC, that's the new piece, that's the verification piece, and that is expected to come out in March of next year. So we're less than a year out now. And so, I've worked with some companies for more than a year to try and build their security program. So it's not a small lift. So you don't want to wait until January to get started on this. It's good to go ahead and get a baseline. Because we're going to start to see the CMMC requirements, they say, in summer next year. And so, it could prevent you from bidding on a new contract if you haven't been doing your groundwork and your foundation of going through NIST 800-171 and preparing your systems for that assessment. Because a third-party assessor is going to come in and it's going to be up to them whether or not you get that certification, whether or not you're going to be able to bid on that contract. And so it's important to go ahead and get started on those now.
Awesome. Well, one of the goals of my podcast here is to educate, but also inspire people into action. So anybody, once again, listening to this or watching this, no matter what it is, you might want to get started on it. Because as you were saying that, I was thinking, a year or less, that's like crunch time. Like you're playing catch up at this point. So I'm glad you told us about that so people can get on it. So
sure.
So what kind of, bringing this more into a personal space, what kind of cyber attacks are kind of the mainstream thing that you're seeing out there against personal people or businesses?
Right. Well, I'm sure you've probably heard about phishing and social engineering, those kinds of things. Those have not gone away. If anything, what we've seen recently is how much more sophisticated those attacks are becoming. Before you could look at the spelling of words or the grammar of an email and know that, that's probably not really my bank, because they typically will proofread. But anymore nowadays, those phishing attacks are getting more sophisticated. Social engineering, especially around things like the pandemic and any other like social activity. You can expect an increase in social engineering attacks. More and more we're on social media, and someone could target your activity online and try and attack you social engineering, and all that requires is a telephone. So that's not even a very sophisticated attack, but those have been increasing as well. Something else we see for business owners is business email compromise. That has been increasing a lot lately, and that's where like, let's say, for instance, you have an invoice that you need to pay, and that vendor, they contact you and they say, hey, we've changed our banking information, so send the next payment here. Well, unbeknownst to the business, that vendor is an imposter. And so now you have paid an adversary, a criminal, what you should have been paying your vendor legitimately. And so now you're out that money, and your vendor still needs to get paid. So
that
that's a big one.
Where I'm at, I'm a realtor, been doing that for almost 10 years.
Yes.
And that's something over probably the last 4 years we've been disclosing. Our local association created a forum to have that conversation specifically with hopefully all agents are doing it, but all buyers and sellers, because there was a situation where it was a couple $100,000 was wired to the wrong account. And I always have to have that conversation with, sellers kind of look at me confused, like, what does it matter to me? I'm getting the money. The title company or the attorney is just going to wire it to my bank, right? That's usually not intercepted. They already know those information. I was like, because you want to know that there's a risk that your buyer gets taken advantage of. If you're expecting a cash offer on your property and boom, $200,000 or $500,000 is gone, they're not getting that back. The likelihood is slim. So I always tell people, trust but verify. When you get the wiring instructions or you get something that looks fishy, pick up the phone and call, or physically go into the place if it happens to be a local business or something, and call and be like, hey, is this right? Why am I getting billed an extra $500 on the deliveries for last week or something? Trust but verify.
Right. And you think about, you want to find the best in people. You want to be able to trust people. But any more nowadays in cyberspace, we have to put ourselves in the shoes of an adversary. And like you said, verify. online, unless you are absolutely certain of who you're talking to because you've been able to verify it outside of that band of being on the internet, like with a text message or something. You can't really trust anybody that you encounter because it's so easy to impersonate nowadays a legitimate person. And that'll go into some of my suggestions.
Look at the TV. I don't know if you've seen it. I think it's on MTV. Catfished. That's just dating and people faking who they are.
Oh yeah, that's another
and totally faking people. I mean, that's going down. It's going down a different path. But same basic thing can happen in business and other things.
Oh yeah, and it's heartbreaking to hear some of the stories. And so, that's something that I'm glad we're talking about this and you're getting this out to folks, is because you don't want your family to become a victim to something like this. You don't want to face those difficult challenges of changing all your bank accounts, of freezing your credit, and I mean it's just a whole lot. But at the end of the day, I always try and encourage folks to put yourself in the position of the bad guy. We don't want to be that, but in order to protect ourselves and to think, what is the worst that could happen? It gives you kind of that pause to say, oh, that's right. Maybe just let me confirm. So if somebody calls you out of the blue and is like, hey, it's your bank and your card's been stolen, can you verify the number? That should cause you to pause and say, I didn't call you. Give me, give me your name, and you go outside of that, look up the number yourself and call them back.
Same thing, even if it's the police calling you to tell you, oh, we got, verify this information.
Yeah, the IRS is another one. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So trust but verify, I think is good advice.
Another thing is, don't believe the emails and the voicemails and the text messages about your business has been pre-approved for a $500,000 loan. I get those every day, and it's like, that's funny. I never applied for one.
Right.
Not getting me.
With the text messages, and this happens around the holidays a lot. I tell folks, if it sounds too good to be true, this is one of those situations where it's definitely too good to be true. So watch out for any sensational, fear mongering or something like that, or like, if you don't get this last item, and that, like, do it quick.
Do it quick.
Always be able to pause.
Go to Walgreens or CVS and get the I don't care. Just get the American Express gift cards. And give me the numbers. Like, I get it all the time. I don't know what it is about the real estate industry, but they will pretend to be my managing broker. And I can't. I just left it off. Small office. There was like 12 people in there, and they would try and spoof her all the time. And like, I really need you to do me a favor. I'm in a meeting right now. Like, at 8:00 at night, you ain't in no conference call meeting. Like, I know.
Yeah.
You may be out with clients, but you ain't out there. It was like clockwork, and I'm at a large company now with like 10,000 agents, and I got one the other day from the CEO. I was like, the CEO doesn't have my phone number.
Right. That's not usual. Yeah. Exactly.
But you gotta be really careful with those things. I mean, I see them on my email all the time, all kinds of things, and I'm like, I'm not opening that.
Right.
And if it is legit and I don't open it, somebody's gonna call me because they'll have my phone number.
Right.
And they'll be like, Keith, why didn't you open that email? Oh, okay, send it to me again.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
If it comes through in the next 5 minutes, I know it's legit.
Yeah.
So
verification. It's a good
verify.
step.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say are maybe the top 5 tips or so then to not become a victim?
We've talked about a few things, but one in particular is passwords. Think about what passwords you're using on what sites. Are you using the same password on multiple websites? Because if you are, then if one site is compromised, then your other accounts where you've used that same password has also been compromised. So do not reuse passwords would be my first recommendation. My second recommendation is don't use personal information in your passwords. Makes it easy to remember, right? But if you're in social media, somebody has developed a file on you, and they know your birthday, they know your kids' names, they know your pets' names. So don't use personal information in your passwords. And so then you're probably thinking, well, how the heck am I going to remember all my passwords? So my third recommendation is look at a password manager. there are free password managers out there where you can have a long, complex password for every single one of your sites, and you never have to remember a single one. The only thing you have to remember is your master password for the entire database where your passwords are stored. And then the password manager protects all of those. And so you're not using the same password on multiple sites, and you're using a long, complex password that's not likely to be guessed or in a brute force attack where a computer is trying all the different combinations of letters and numbers to get your password. So password manager. The other thing that I recommend, I guess, is number 4, is multi-factor authentication. Anytime you can turn it on, turn it on. There's some debate in the IT space and the cybersecurity space about, how secure is your SMS versus the authenticator app on your phone. But the bottom line is that most people don't do multi-factor authentication. So any one that you can turn on is going to increase your security to a new level. So
multi-factor most people don't do that, huh?
It's true. It really is. And you'll find it a lot, I think, with like parents, an older generation. It's harder for them to understand that concept because they're so used to, because, they didn't grow up with computers. So they've become accustomed to typing in their password. Well, for that short amount of time, from the time that we started working on computers until now, that's just the way that we did it. And so, you and I, we might find it pretty easy to set up a password manager and start using it. But for the older generations, that's a lot harder to do because they're not seeing that I have to type it in. But with a password manager, you don't even have to type it in. It plugs it in for you. So that's a really big one that I like to push.
Yeah, the 2-factor thing is, I try to set it up on everything I can. I will admit sometimes it's a real pain in the butt. Like, okay, do I want an email or do I want a text? I get so many texts as it is,
Right.
like it's so annoying. But it's like, you know what? I can go delete the text after I've authenticated. No big deal. Clean up my text messages.
Yeah, but if you think about it, if your bank account is compromised and you get locked out, well, you're going to have to get in the car and go down to the bank to prove who you are. And that's going to take some time. And then they're going to have to spin up your accounts again, which was going to require them to call somebody. So that short amount of time that it takes to put in those 6 digits from a text message or from the authenticator app is really, in the grand scheme of things, not a lot of time. Because you don't want to be in that situation where you're having to go and reset all your accounts and wait for the bank to reimburse you for the money that was lost. I mean, it's a headache.
Absolutely. I tell you, that's one of the, it kind of goes into kind of crosses both worlds really, but like the whole gas pump thing and the fake readers that they put on. That's why I use a credit card all the time instead of my debit card. Because I'm like, at least if I got to shut it off, it's one phone call to my credit card company.
Right. Yeah.
And then, that's all I put on my credit card. Just maybe some pizza at Casey's every now and then. Only Midwesterners probably get that one, but like that's it. And then pay it off. But at least I know I've got another layer of security there through the credit card company versus them having access to, the different accounts in my personal accounts. So.
Right. Yeah.
So, that's some good advice there. Now we'll switch to kids.
Yes.
What should the parents out there that are listening to this, what should they do to help take precautions to protect their kids or conversations with their kids? What should they be doing?
Well, this really hits close to home because I have 3, all under the age of 14. And so it is a scary world out there. It is a scary world out there. And, a couple of my suggestions for kids is, one, you've got to know what your kids are doing. It's really hard for us with our day-to-day jobs and the responsibilities to have to go and learn, okay, what is Roblox? I don't get it. But you really need to understand what it is that your kids are doing online. You need to have some knowledge about what is Roblox, what is the lingo, and Roblox just comes to mind because I have boys. But anything that your kids are into, is you need to know about it. You need to you don't have to become an expert, but you need to be able to understand, okay, what it is that they're doing. The other
Or if
thing
there's a
that
red flag that goes off, you maybe at least recognize it and can do something about it.
right, or if
Yeah.
there's this, something that comes up in the news and you're like, oh yeah, that my kid plays that, you can, investigate further. My other recommendation is know your kids' passwords. Do not allow them to have their own passwords. They must share their passwords with you. And here's the thing, it's not because you don't trust them. It's A, because we don't trust the other people on the internet. And B, kids are notorious for forgetting their passwords. So you having the password as well not only gives you the access to their account to be able to go in and make sure they're not, exposed to something they shouldn't be, but you can be like, well, if you lose your password, you can't get back into Roblox. So don't you want me to have that as well? It just makes sense, and that's a deal breaker in our house. I have to know all the passwords. Otherwise, you don't get to use the device. So you kind of have to draw a line in the sand, and just, you're the one that's supposed to protect them. So as much as we can do to do that is important. And then the other thing is a lot of devices nowadays have built-in control, like time limitations, limitations on who they can text. We use Apple, and so that's a built-in feature for families. And so any way that you're not, I don't like to advocate like spying, like those kinds of apps that spy on what your kids are doing, but where you can put limitations, I think is important. Time limitations. They don't need to be on there all day long, and they don't need to be on there all night long. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, there needs to be a cutoff. No good thing happens on the internet after 8 p.m. I mean, we know, we're adults.
Good point. Yeah.
We know this.
I do the same thing, and I'll point it out. We use Android, so I've got Family Link. I think it's a Google product. I could be wrong, but it allows me to do that same thing too with my oldest. He's the only one that's got a phone, but I can set the time frames throughout the day. I can set them like, I don't know what it is set at. It's off the top of my head, like 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. So after that, it won't let him do anything but make an emergency call.
Right.
There might be settings in there for who he can text, but in order to download an app, he has to request it, and my wife and I have to approve of it through our phones, which I would, piece of advice to parents out there, don't leave your phone sitting around if they know the password to it, because
don't let them know the password.
They'll just get on it, and then they'll approve that video game download or whatever program it is. That's happened at my house. And then, ironically, talking about passwords earlier, I won't say what program, but my youngest, I got an email yesterday that a password of mine was changed. And I'm like, well, that's weird. Nobody would have gone in there and changed this particular password. And, of course, they've got access to all kinds of devices, but he finally admitted to it today that he went in there and changed it. He wanted to download something, and so he knew the password and went in and changed it. And I'm like, I get emails about that, right? Oops.
Lesson learned.
Yeah, you learn some as a parent.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the last thing that I recommend for parents is talking. Just talk about it. Ask them what they're looking at online. Have those dialogues, because in the event that something happens online, like bullying, cyberbullying, or something like that, you want your child to feel comfortable enough to come and talk to you about it. And so you having some knowledge of how everything works in that space, you have some knowledge about Roblox, they've encountered an issue, they need to feel comfortable to come and talk to you about it. I think that is probably one of the most important things when it comes to parenting a child in the digital age.
I couldn't agree more with that, because we always try to tell my kids, like, they'll talk about stuff, and it's like, you do realize, like, your mom and I are so old, but yet so young, that we've seen everything go from floppy disks to today. Right. We have seen the complete evolution of personal computers, cell phones being introduced with Snake on them, all the way up to smartphones and everything they do today. Like, we're that generation that's seen a lot of that stuff. We know exactly. We saw AOL Instant Messengers and the weird conversations and the creeps that were on there. We know what the internet does.
Oh, yes.
We know who's on there.
Well, and
we know that. which is weird. But you have to have that open dialogue and it kind of show them that you know what's going on there.
Well, and it also, you can tap into your own experience, and you can, point out things. Well, like, I'm just thinking of an instance where, my friend told me that such and such, happened. And it's a situation where you can say, well, did you know that anyone can post on the internet? You can't always believe everything that you read. And so there's situations where that back and forth dialogue can, tap into your own experience and, not necessarily scare them into not using it at all, but at least to make them aware, because their future, they need to be digital citizens first and foremost. And they're going to learn that by doing, but also by us being that guiding light for them.
Yeah, I didn't realize that, well, I'd say 10 years ago, there wasn't a whole lot of user-created content like there is today.
Mm-hmm.
I know Wikipedia, right? I just finished college here this last December, right? I always beat it into our heads. Remember that the information on Wikipedia may be the truth, but it may not be, because at least at one point in time anyway, it was partially user-created. But you think about now, like YouTube and all these other video apps, yeah, there's a real person. You can see that real person in there, but they may not be 100% the expert. So you have to do that, like trust and verify. What are their credentials?
Right.
Who is this person speaking? If they just come on there and start talking about something, they don't, they could be blowing smoke out of their, what?
Right. Exactly. And those are just great ways to engage in discussion with the children, because they're going to learn it some way or another. So it may as well be you that's having those discussions.
Yeah. Because not everything you read on Google is the truth. Just like everything you read in the news is not always the truth. And YouTube and, so on and on. That's a good point about being a cyber citizen. It's just the world we live in these days.
Right.
You have to adapt to it.
Right. Yeah.
So, well, Lori, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. This has been a fascinating conversation and valuable to literally anybody in the audience, whether they're going for a government contract or a small business owner or just a parent with some kids who are starting to discover devices, which seems to happen younger and younger every day. But, there's a lot of good information in here for people to take some action on or at least think about, be more aware of. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
And for anybody watching or listening, I've got it scrolling across the bottom, whiteravensecurity.com. I made sure to include HTTPS, which means it's secure.
Yes.
I don't know enough about
that.
And that's more information. But all her contact information will be in the show notes as well. So if you want to reach out to her, learn more about these classes, consultations, whatever the case may be, all her contact information will be there.
Thanks so much, Keith. It was really great to talk to you.
Absolutely. You take it easy.
All right. You too.
There you go, folks. Remember, you can go check out my website, battlebuddypodcast.net. Trying to always keep new and information and resources available there. If you happen to be struggling right now, remember the National Suicide Hotline number is now 988, press 1, or the same old text number is there, which is 838-255.